This is Brother Peter Diamond, VaticanCatholic.com. They are not using the votes to determine who wins the presidency. The networks called the South Carolina Republican presidential primary race with only 1% of the actual vote in. Here's the clip from CBS in which they declare the winner, yet they admit that they only have 1% of the actual vote in. And they say that they're able to make this projection based on exit polls. After I play this clip and during the course of this video, I will explain why this admission proves that the media knows the result in advance, that the votes are not being used to determine who wins, and that the whole thing is a hoax.
This is a Campaign 2012 update. There is breaking news at this hour. CBS News is now projecting in a major upset, Newt Gingrich has won South Carolina's Republican presidential primary, defeating one-time frontrunner Mitt Romney. Have a look at the votes in so far. We have Newt Gingrich with 1% of the vote in. You see that Romney has a higher vote there, but what we are projecting is based on the exit polling that we did. Our projection of a Gingrich win is based on the analysis of the early vote count that you just saw and on the polling that we did of voters after they cast their ballots.
CBS, like the other networks, actually publishes the results of its exit polls online. Here's an image of CBS's published exit poll results for the 2012 South Carolina primary. Guess how many people participated in their exit poll? You can see that the total number of people who participated in their exit poll was 2,381. Well, there were 601,166 total votes cast in the South Carolina primary. Do the math. 2,381 is 0.396% of 601,166 votes. So their exit polling data, upon which they claim to base their declaration concerning who has won, is based on not even 1% of the people who voted. It's not even a half of 1%. It's 0.396% or 0.4%. That is a joke. It's not possible for them to determine the winner based on exit polls. The only way that they can determine who has won the election without any of the votes, as they do, is if they know the winner in advance, or the people who are determining the winner give them that information in advance. And that's what's happening. The election is rigged. It is not based on how the people are voting. With computerized voting, it's over. The whole thing is programmed in advance. It's all decided in advance. And one of the reasons this is so clear in South Carolina is because South Carolina is completely electronic. In some of the other states, it's not as easy for them to pull off the hoax. For example, in caucus states, it's more difficult to rig the election, and some of the candidates that they want to push down, they have to give more votes to. However, those can be and are still rigged, as we will see. So in South Carolina, it's extremely easy for them, because it's all computerized voting. And that's why we see that the very moment the polls close, with 0% of the actual vote in, they determine who has won, and they claim to be able to know it based on exit polls, which is total nonsense. And they did call these elections without any of the votes in, because they actually made these, quote, projections before they even had 1%. Here's the clip from Fox News and host Bill Hemmer, in which he says that they determined the winner with less than 1% of the actual vote in. By the time he gets to his segment and finishes speaking, they had already supposedly received 2% of the actual vote. But he indicates that they had less than 1% when they made their, quote, projection based on the exit polls, which, as we just saw, are nothing. Also notice in this segment that they not only tell us that they've determined the winner, which is a complete hoax, but the people are so clueless that they can actually tell them that they know how particular groups of people broke down and how this particular segment of society favored this particular candidate. This is all based on the same exit poll of 2,381 people, which is nothing.
More explanation for what we've seen in these results tonight. Hey, Bill.
Good evening again, Megan, Brett. Great to see you. Now, listen, the results are preliminary right now. In fact, we only have about 1% or less than 1% of the vote that we can tabulate right now. But based on the exit polling, this would seem to be a major concern to the Romney campaign, what we're about to show you here. And a big boost to Gingrich in one part of the state that, this is real-time voting, by the way, and one part of the state that frankly, Romney should have done quite well with his economic message. About 2% of the vote right now is in. We've already called it for Gingrich, okay? Romney's in the orange, Gingrich is in the yellow. A lot of space is still to fill in here. But I want you to key in on an area over here. This is the PD River area. But based on what we're seeing right now in 2012, Gingrich swept this entire area, which as you move toward Florida in 10 days from now, there'll be certain parts of that state that reflect a similar economic downturn here in South Carolina. At the moment, we can say that Gingrich did very well up here in upstate. Very conservative voters, evangelical voters there. Here in the PD River area, Gingrich has done exceedingly well also. Down here in the low country, where you would expect Mitt Romney to do quite well. That is where McCain performed so well in 2008. It seems to be rather split, almost 50-50 now between Gingrich and Romney and the support they're getting there. Based on also what we're seeing here in the middle part of the state, Columbia, where you've got big counties like Richland, right here where the state capital is, a lot of votes right there. What we're seeing in counties like Richland and Lexington County to the west of Richland, that's where Romney appears to have his most strength so far based on the exit polling that we're seeing in South Carolina.
So he confirms that they called the race with less than 1% of the actual vote, that they base it on the exit polling data, and they attempt to give you all of these details about how particular counties felt, how particular religious groups felt. This is all without any of the votes and based on a few exit polls. This is a total joke. In fact, here is an image of Fox News's published exit poll results from the South Carolina Republican primary. As you can see, the number of total participants is 2,381. That number is quite similar to the number we looked at previously in the CBS results. In fact, it's the exact same number because it's the exact same poll. They used the exact same group to get their exit polling data. The reason they all use the same group is because if they did not, and the exit polling were independent and legitimate, you would get a variety of results, and that would preclude the networks from unanimously announcing the so-called winner at the same time or almost at the same time. They must be on the same page, in other words. This article, which was put out by the Associated Press and carried by ABC News, says that, quote, these results are from an exit poll conducted for AP and the television networks by Edison Research as voters left their polling places at 35 randomly selected sites in South Carolina. The survey involved interviews with 2,381 Republican primary voters and has a margin of sampling error of plus or minus 3 percentage points, end quote. So here we have confirmed that all of the networks use the exact same poll, and yet they dishonestly and deceptively act as if they're coming up with their own calculations. Here are two clips. The first one is from host Keith Olbermann, in which he declares that all of the networks, with the exception of CNN, have already declared a winner in South Carolina. Usually the networks and the media call the winner at the same time, but occasionally one or two of them will lag a few minutes behind to give the impression that there's some difference between them, when in fact they are just different flavors of the same conspiracy. They are all receiving the same information. So, in the first clip, notice how he says that all of the networks, with the exception of CNN, have already declared the winner. And notice the graphic which indicates that they have 0% of the actual vote in. In the second clip, it is audio from CNN, in which they explain how they've crunched the numbers, and that this special calculus has enabled them to come up with the result, as if the information they're receiving about exit polls and basing their conclusion on is different from the other networks which had already declared a winner, when it's not. It's all a deception to make it look like there's something more involved with their hoax than there actually is. In fact, as you watch these clips, keep these images in mind. This is CNN's exit poll for the South Carolina Republican primary. Notice the number of respondents, 2,381. It's the exact same number, the exact same poll, and the exact same information.
Apparently, all the major news organizations except CNN have already called this race for Newt Gingrich. NBC is suggesting that it might be a 9 or 10-point victory, perhaps double digits beyond 10 points.
The real vote, the vote that people actually go in and cast, we were able to match together with these numbers as we talked before, put them together. And what's interesting is that we focused on the counties that we thought that Newt Gingrich would do well in, and he has done well in, or he has exceeded what we thought he would do. We're able to take this formula, put it together. Our exit poll team, which is our pollster, our statisticians, and our political folks together, crunch it together. That's how we get away.
So even though technically Romney's ahead in the raw votes, the votes that have so far come in, you were still able to make this projection?
Yeah, absolutely, because we're taking this exit poll data from the exit poll interviewers, put it together, mold it together, and that's where you get the statistical model where we're able to project the winner.
All right, it's fascinating calculus from Mark Preston. Appreciate it. We'll check in with Mark throughout the evening.
It's just a complete hoax. CNN's data are the same as the other networks. The same group, Edison Research, supplies all of the television networks with the same exit poll data. And when CNN waited longer than the other networks, they only waited a few minutes longer. They wound up calling the race with 1 or 2% of the vote in. So they're not using the votes. It's all determined in advance. That's the only way that the networks could call the winner with none of the actual vote in. Now, as I said, it's very easy for them to do this in South Carolina because South Carolina is 100% electronic voting. Most voting today is electronic, but in some other states, there is a certain percentage of hand-counted ballots. In those cases, it's a bit more difficult for them to rig the election, but it's often rigged as well. For example, Iowa is considered to be arguably the most transparent of all the states, because they hand count the ballots in public and then call or fax in the results to the headquarters. But it's now been confirmed that the Iowa election was rigged as well. 8 precincts mysteriously disappeared. They went unreported. The most reasonable explanation for that is that they deliberately did not report those totals because they did not want to include them in the official result. Even with their, quote, announced winner, they had to later admit that they were wrong. They then said that the missing tallies from third place and beyond don't even matter. And in the following clip, we're going to see that Fox News reported that in the case of one missing precinct, they didn't even use the actual vote totals. They simply consulted Romney's camp and Santorum's camp, and they came up with a, quote, gentleman's agreement about what the vote tally should be.
Chris Wallace, Chris?
Let's take it.
Thanks so much. Yeah, Carl, you've just gotten some word from a source in the Republican National Committee. Tell us what it is.
First, that they made the correction in Story County, which moved it from an 18-point margin for Santorum to a 4-vote margin for Santorum, and that the Keokuk County precinct, the Romney and Santorum people have agreed what the count was, and it will show an 8.
This is in Clinton.
This is in Clinton County.
Right.
You have the one outstanding precinct in the state, and that it will show an 18-vote victory in that precinct for Mitt Romney, which will give him a statewide victory of 14 votes over Rick Santorum.
So I don't understand. You're saying that they basically have come to an agreement as to what the vote's going to be in Clinton?
The person who's got the official piece of paper is missing, but the Romney and Santorum people who are monitoring it agree on what the number is. So until they've basically agreed, we will confirm, both of us, the outcome in this particular precinct, and the state party will accept that.
So they don't even have the results. They don't even use the results. They will simply allow the Romney camp and the Santorum camp to decide what the results were, and the state will accept that. That's not even to mention the documented 8 missing precincts and all kinds of other anomalies, in addition to the fact that the GOP moved the vote count to a secret location. As I said, the most reasonable explanation for why these papers were not turned over from the other precincts is that they did not want to include them in the official result. According to the article Iowa Vote Fraud Official, quote, other missing or uncounted votes were expected to be heavy Ron Paul supporting major populated areas and college town precincts, now leaving the true winner forever in question, end quote. And it's interesting that with these 8 precincts missing, Ron Paul wound up finishing in a very close 3rd place. In this article called 2012 GOP Caucus Count Unresolved, it also confirms that 8 precincts were not reported. It says that they will never be certified. It says that we will never know who won. It also makes the amazing admission that for years the Iowa vote count was turned over to the Voter News Service. The Voter News Service replaced the News Election Service, and the National Election Pool, which works with Edison Research, is the latest version of that organization. It's a consortium of the television networks and the Associated Press. So what this article says, and this article was written by the Des Moines Register's chief political writer, is that in many years the tabulation for the votes in Iowa was handled by the media. That's what it says. Here's the 1996 note, quote, Republicans in Iowa decided to do no official party count. Instead, the tabulating was handled by the Voter News Service, which replaced the News Election Service. End quote. The Voter News Service again refers to the television networks and the Associated Press. So we have not free elections, we actually have the media controlling the elections. This is from the Des Moines Register's chief political writer. No wonder then that in most cases the media can declare a winner with 0% or 1% of the vote in, and so the whole thing is rigged, the whole thing is a hoax. In the places where computerized voting predominates, which is almost everywhere, it's very easy for them to rig the election. That's why they can call those states with none of the votes, or with a very small percentage of the votes in. In a few of the other cases it requires a little bit more effort, such as in the caucus states. That's also why a candidate the media does not consider to be, quote, top tier, might do very well in a state like Iowa, and yet he will have no chance as we move into the other computerized voting states. I also find it interesting that CNN calls their coverage of the elections America's Choice 2012. Perhaps they call it America's Choice to put a special emphasis into the minds of the audience, that America, the people, are determining the winner, when the facts indicate otherwise. Another noteworthy example of what we're discussing came from the 2010 senatorial election in California between Democrat Barbara Boxer and Republican challenger Carly Fiorina. NBC declared the winner of that race with only 17% of the vote in, and you can see on the screen that of the 17% of the vote that they supposedly had in, Fiorina was leading Boxer. So they still didn't have 83% of the vote, and of the 17% that they supposedly had, Fiorina was leading. Nevertheless, they called the election for Boxer at that time, and what do you know, Boxer wound up winning. That's because they knew the result in advance. After seeing this expose, someone may ask why the media would call the results so early, for example in some cases without any of the votes, and risk their hoax being uncovered. They could simply wait longer. And there are 2 reasons for this. The first reason is the ratings. And the second reason, which is the most important one, is that the media calls the results so early and risks their hoax being uncovered. Because by declaring the winner before any average person, or even the people who work at the election sites could possibly know the winner, the media can create the impression, in the minds of average, undiscerning Americans, that the media is all-knowing. The average American will then look to the media with confidence and believe what the media tells him. For after all, the media knows who wins these elections before any of us could, and in a way that sounds far too complicated for us to understand. The average person will then believe the media when the media ostracizes a particular candidate, says that candidate cannot win, or puts out their phony and completely manipulated polls. Thus, their announcement of the winner, without any of the votes, is crucial to their control of the people, and they correctly assume that their story will be accepted without question by almost everyone. Here's the clip from computer programmer Clint Curtis, who testified during a congressional hearing about how easy it is to rig elections.
Mr. Curtis, would you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Clinton Eugene Curtis.
And where do you reside?
Tallahassee, Florida.
And what is your profession?
I'm a computer programmer.
Would you please speak into the microphone so the audience can hear your testimony?
I'm a computer programmer.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes,
How do you know that to be the case?
because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for President Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I work for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
And when you say did just that, it would rig an election?
It would flip the vote 51-49 to whoever you wanted it to go to and whichever race you wanted to win.
And would that program that you designed be something that elections officials that might be on county boards of elections could detect?
They'd never see it.
Mr. Would you answer that question once again?
They would never see it.
I will close this video with the footage from the 2008 presidential election. This footage shows that at the very moment the polls closed in the western United States, CNN and the other networks determined that Barack Obama had won all of those states. And notice that in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, the graphic says 0%. That indicates that the media did not have any of the votes from those states. And the total number of exit polls taken by the media for that particular election was not even 0.1% of the total number of votes cast. So, all of the states on the West Coast were declared won by Obama without any of the votes. And all of the networks made this declaration at the very same time, at the very moment the polls closed. The only reason that they wait until the polls close is because they are required to do so. It's obvious that they could declare the quote winner much earlier, because they know the results in advance. They even count down the seconds. They just can't wait to let the world know what they've known all along. The whole thing is a hoax. We pointed this out years ago in our video, The Stunning Secret About Election Night. They are not using the votes to determine who wins. People need to wake up.
So in a few seconds, those states will be closing their polls and presumably we'll be able to see what's going on and make perhaps a major projection at that point. This is a moment that a lot of people have been waiting for. This is a moment that potentially could be rather historic. And CNN can now project that Barack Obama, 47 years old, will become the president-elect of the United States. We project he now has enough electoral votes, more than 270, more than enough to become the 44th president of the United States. This little-known U.S. senator only a few years ago, seemingly coming out of nowhere, delivering the Democratic Convention keynote address back at the convention in 2004, all of a sudden taking off for a moment.
In 2018, Americans voted for who would represent them in Congress. But in North Carolina, the election results were really weird. These squares represent all the voters in North Carolina. They were voting for these 13 seats in Congress. About half voted for Republicans, and about 48% voted for Democrats. So you might think of the 13 congressional seats, maybe Democrats would have won 6 seats, and Republicans would have won 7. But no. Democrats only won 3 of 13 seats, way less than half. This imbalance was because North Carolina's congressional districts had been gerrymandered. It means that these voters had been grouped into districts very strategically with the goal of benefiting one party. Gerrymandering has pretty much always happened in America. That's because every 10 years, the political districts are redrawn. And in most cases, those new lines get drawn by whoever holds power in state government at the time. That's what happened in 2010. Republicans won control of lots of state governments and redrew the political lines to favor themselves. And over the next few years, redistricting helped them hold on to almost all those states. This shifted the balance of power. And it turns out behind a lot of this was one guy.
Usually the voters get to pick the politicians. In redistricting, the politicians get to pick the voters.
This is Thomas Hofeller, the mapmaker who helped Republicans gerrymander districts over the last decade. When Hofeller died in 2018, his daughter found thousands of his emails and files, which she shared with activists. The files show that Tom Hofeller's fingerprints are all over the way America's political maps look today. But North Carolina was his masterpiece. And if you want to understand why gerrymandering is such a big problem in the US, that's a good place to start.
Why would they omit saying who was in second? Well, you know why. Ron Paul. What do you think that is?
I think it's two things. I think one is some people don't want to hear the message because it's a threat to them, because I'm a threat to the establishment. Some, though, just flat out, they don't understand what freedom is all about.
Is Ron Paul being ignored by the media? 97% of you said yes, he is. 3% said no.
Ron Paul makes a lot of sense, and more people ought to listen to him.
But is there a media bias against him? Just from the media's point of view, isn't he good for the media? It's because he is such an extraordinary candidate that the mainstream media doesn't pay attention.
There is one candidate who has been largely ignored by the mainstream media. Shame on us. He deserves more attention from us than he's getting.
Congressman, your libertarian views are certainly somewhat unconventional, but they have picked up growing support in this race.
I'm fascinated with your word unconventional. Isn't it strange that we can apply that term to freedom and liberty and the Constitution, limited government is a balanced budget? You're proposing this unconventional idea of government.
It's time we quit this. It's time. It's trillions of dollars we're spending on these wars.
Another question. Mr. Paul, why is the media ignoring you to the extent to not mention you at number 2 in the poll? They mentioned number 1 and 3. Why?
Good question. I don't know if I have the answer, because we have to ask those who do those kind of things. I believe personally that I am gaining recognition in the campaign, and it's a threat to a lot of people. It's a threat to the military-industrial complex. It's a threat to the bankers, the big corporations who get all the benefit. It's a threat to the people who preach that we have to be in the world and be in all these countries. So I think it's big banks, big money, big corporations, and the people who want to be the warmongers. If our views, keep growing in popularity as they are, it's a real threat to the establishment. So the establishment is well protected in many of those individuals that control the 5 major networks.
Well, it seems the mass media has officially given up on one Republican presidential candidate, Ron Paul, who has consistently attracted a very passionate and dedicated following, reportedly has had only one embedded reporter throughout the entire campaign. And now he apparently has none, because MSNBC pulled the sole embed off the bus. And this proves that for mainstream reporters, Ron Paul just isn't worth their time. Now, when you see video of Paul, he usually is swarmed with a very energized fan base, yet he hasn't won a single caucus yet. And this has the candidate raising suspicion.
Because sometimes we get thousands of people like this, and we'll take them to the polling booth, and we won't win the caucus. So, a lot of our supporters are very suspicious about it. But the straw votes have been very confusing. I mean, you've probably read in the paper about what happened up in Maine. I mean, there's just a lot of confusion. They said, well, let's have a recount. They said, well, we can't have a recount. They just write these numbers down on pieces of paper and we throw them away afterwards. So it's that kind of stuff that makes you suspicious.
Tonight, Maine's Republican Party announced Mitt Romney as the winner of their caucuses.
That winner is Mitt Romney.
What the headlines haven't told you is that what happened in Maine is the messiest caucus Republicans have had so far.
Certain residents in 3 of Maine's counties are being treated right now as if they do not exist.
The numbers that the state GOP in Maine are reporting are, according to caucus chairman, incorrect.
Kennebec County did vote as they were supposed to last week, but their vote total, as you see here, shows up as a 0 in the Republican Party's official results. Washington County postponed their caucuses on Saturday because of a snowstorm they expected to hit the area.
There's a lot more than what you said. The man who canceled it was a Mitt Romney supporter, and the snowstorm he predicted didn't happen.
Then there's Waldo County. Even though nearly all Waldo County towns held caucuses on February 4th, here's how most of Waldo County's votes look in the official Republican Party's results list. 0 votes.
Waldo County, where voters from 18 towns gathered for municipal caucuses. I talked with Matt McDonald, a pastor of a small community church in Belfast. He was nominated as the chairman of the Belfast caucus. The state instructed the chairman to not read any of the votes aloud, and instead to send them directly to Augusta. McDonald made a motion to have the votes read aloud at the caucus, and it passed unanimously.
The vote was 8 for Ron Paul, 7 for Rick Santorum, 5 for Mitt Romney, and there were 2 undecideds.
No results have been posted from the Belfast caucus.
The lady on the line said that she had received our tallies, our votes, but hadn't recorded them online yet, and she said Romney with 9, Rick Santorum with 5, Ron Paul with 2. Well, of course, those were not the right numbers, and I told her. And she said, well, those are the numbers we have.
You see, dozens of towns on the GOP site are listed as if no one voted, including in Waterville, Maine, home to 15,000 people.
We contacted the Maine Republican Party today to find out what the heck happened to all of Waldo County's votes. So far, we have not heard back. The margin of victory for Mitt Romney in Maine was 194 votes. That's called a hair.
On every occasion, the votes that were lost were Ron Paul votes. In one case, the votes were actually transferred from paper to electronics, and the lady doing the transfer was a Mitt Romney person.
Someone here keeps yelling acorn, acorn. Now, let me just say to you, there are serious allegations of voter fraud in the battleground states across America. They must be investigated, and no one should corrupt the most precious right we have, and that is the right to vote.
Tonight, John McCain isn't alone in focusing on voter fraud. The New York Times reports that tens of thousands of eligible voters have been mistakenly removed from lists in swing states like Colorado, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Nevada, and North Carolina. Apparently, the result of a 2002 law. Some election officials are denying any wrongdoing. We'll look into that in the days ahead. As for the allegations, the specific ones that John McCain is talking about, we sent Drew Griffin of CNN's Special Investigations Unit to look into it, and his report from Indiana is frankly shocking. Tonight, we're keeping him honest.
There are 5,000 of them. These?
These.
These?
Those.
And these. They are new voter registration applications turned in by the community organizing group ACORN, which has launched a massive voter registration drive. And with 5,000 applications in this one county dumped on just before the October 6th deadline, it looked to Elections Board Administrator Ruth Ann Hoagland like ACORN was extremely successful until her workers began finding problems. A lot of them?
50%. We had close to 5,000 total from ACORN, and so far we have identified about 2,100.
So roughly half of them
Roughly half.
are bad.
Correct.
Registered to a dead person, registered as a person who lives at a fast food
Yes.
shop,
Yes.
or just all of them amazingly in the same hand.
Yes. Yes. All the signatures look exactly the same. Everything on the card filled out looks just the same.
Ruth Ann, fraud?
We have no idea what the motive behind it is. It's just overwhelming to us.
It's not that some are bad. Once they started going through them, everyone they looked at was bad. Hoagland decided to stop the review altogether, work on other apparently legitimate registrations, and get back to the other half of what she now calls the fake pile later.
It's frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Here's another ACORN filled out registration form. It's for Jimmy Johns, 10839 Broadway in Crown Point. Jimmy Johns. We decided to track him down. Here he is. Is there anybody here that's actually named Jimmy Johns? Nobody registered to vote here named Jimmy Johns? But this could really... I mean, there's been no fraud yet because people haven't voted yet, right?
Correct. We'll find out on Election Day.
But it certainly sets up a potential.
The potential, I suppose, is always there. It's just that the volume is just incredible.
The Elections Board is run by both Republicans and Democrats. It is fraud, says the Democrat director, Sally Lasota.
Well, if you look, it's the same signature for all three voters. It's as though the one individual did three separate applications, but put, you can tell the signature. We're not handwriting experts, but what's obvious is obvious.
Acorn's voter registration drives are under investigation or suspicion in several states. Just yesterday, local authorities raided this Acorn office in Las Vegas, where Acorn workers allegedly registered members of the Dallas Cowboys football team. Over the last 4 years, a dozen states investigated complaints of fraudulent registrations filed by Acorn, and complaints of fraud by Acorn have exploded nationwide in just the last few weeks. We tried to contact the Acorn director in Gary, Indiana, but when the phone messages went unanswered, we went to the office. It's abandoned. Acorn told us the state director for Indiana Acorn is actually based in this office in Milwaukee, but today we found it empty too. Acorn's attorney in Boston told us allegations his organization has committed fraud is a government attempt to keep the disenfranchised from voting.
We believe their purpose is to attack Acorn and encourage and suppress votes. We think that by attacking Acorn, that they are going to discourage people who may have registered with Acorn from voting.
Brian Meller says Acorn has its own quality control, has fired workers in the past, including workers in Gary. Despite its past, the Obama campaign gave $800,000 to Acorn to help fund its primary registration drive, and Acorn has endorsed Barack Obama for president. The Obama campaign reacted this afternoon saying it is committed to protecting the integrity of the voting process and said it has not worked with Acorn during the general election.
So, Drew, Senator McCain's calling for an investigation. Is what's happening in Indiana a crime?
It absolutely is a crime. That was a fraud, somebody who filled out those forms. And I looked at them, Anderson. They're obviously a fraud. But the election workers say we have to turn this over to the actual elected Board of Elections. The Board of Elections has to then bring in the county attorney to see if a criminal investigation should begin. So all of that will be, weeks, maybe even months down the road. And, of course, that's going to be after the election.
Well, we'll see how it plays a role. Drew Griffin, thanks. Keeping him honest tonight. We continue.
In the last year, though, Donald Trump has added fuel to that fire in a very big way.
Why the hell are you here? Kim, why are you here? Go. Why are you here, man? Go. Why are you here? Let's go.
Al Gore and George Bush and people like Mitt Romney and these people, they're all the same. They're all the same type of candidates. So it's pretty interesting this year to see something a little bit different. So. I mean, we are all across the country going to be watching the polling places. Where we have chapters and where we have members, we're going to be unofficially monitoring those polls in different parts of the country.
Tonight, somehow even more Trump allies are now facing charges for trying to overturn the 2020 election. This time in Wisconsin, and a total, if you look at this, across 5 battleground states, 52 people are now facing charges. 2 of those who were charged in Wisconsin have shown up and passed fake elector indictments. Kenneth Chesebro, who has already pleaded guilty, I should note, in the Georgia case, the same case where Donald Trump himself is charged. Chesebro is also an unindicted co-conspirator in Arizona. Also charged in Wisconsin now, Mike Roman, who was also charged both in Georgia and Arizona. Then there is also a former Trump attorney, Jim Troupis, who is here with me now to talk about all of this. CNN senior legal analyst and former assistant U.S. attorney Ellie Honig as well as CNN political commentator and Trump's former White House communications director, Alyssa Farah-Griffin. Ellie, I just want everyone to listen to what the Attorney General of Wisconsin had to say about why they're bringing these charges now.
But I will say that our focus in any investigation, in any prosecution, is not on the speed with which something's done. It's on doing high-quality investigations, conducting high-quality prosecutions, and getting things right. That's the approach we have taken.
Defending the timeline here, but what do you make of how long it took to bring these charges?
That's boilerplate. I expect that of any prosecutor, but it's also completely unconvincing. It took 3.5 years to bring these charges. I mean, it's 3.5 years ago that this all happened. He's been the AG throughout that time. He's been AG since 2019. I understand investigations take time. I've done plenty of investigations. There is no way an investigation yielding these 3 charges should have taken 3.5 years. And by the way, if you look at the indictment, most of that material is already contained in the other indictments that we've seen. He didn't uncover that much new. There's some new stuff relating to Wisconsin, but I do need to say the indictment looks fairly strong to me. I mean, it does seem like this was a forgery and a fraudulent scheme. So they seem to have the evidence, but the timing, that explanation does not suffice.
I wonder, Alyssa, just what it's like for you to see this, given obviously you were inside the Trump White House in those final few weeks. And while all of this was going on in the campaign and in these battleground states, what it's like to continue to see. I mean, the headline's it's not even the first story that we talk about, which is really remarkable because now we've just seen so many of these fake elector schemes and the indictments that have followed.
I mean, it's crazy, it's historic, it's unprecedented how many advisors of the former president are either in jail now, likely going to face jail time in the future, and yet so many people are lining up wanting to work for him again, wanting him to win the election. I mean, I think of the fact that Peter Navarro, who was in my office in the West Wing very regularly, is literally sitting in jail right now. There's a point where it's like you have to realize that the associates around Donald Trump are not themselves just stepping in it. They're following the lead of Donald Trump. He himself obviously has been indicted on 88 felony counts and charged in these 34 in New York. I mean, this is the company he keeps and it's the person he is.
There are certain issues that people on the left and the right in American politics will never discuss. And the reason they won't discuss them is because they agree mutually. The Democrats and the Republicans agree on something, so they don't want to talk about it in public debate because it reveals the fact that they're basically the same. They only talk about things on which they disagree. Turns out that the things on which they agree are the most important things. The things in which they disagree are relatively minor.
We need to understand that we have been artificially divided for far too long. The global elites have divided us into Democrat and Republican, left and right, conservative and liberal. They have divided us with hot-button issues like abortion and gay rights and gun control and prayer in schools. And by doing so, they have given us, the electorate, the illusion that we have a choice. When in reality, both the Republican and Democratic parties are owned by the same global elites. And on issues that matter to those global elites, they act as one.
By the time you go to the polls and you put your pencil mark on the paper, or punch the lever, whatever you do, the decisions are already made. The candidates have already been selected. And the work goes on there, is who selects the candidates that the people vote for? Who frames the issues that the people vote for? Voting is nothing. It's all done before that stage. This left-right paradigm is a political ploy. It works very well for those who know what they're doing. We find that the Republican Party and the Democrat Party both are pretty much in the hands of a relatively small group of people with a membership of about 4,000. It's called the Council on Foreign Relations. These are the people that are really pulling the strings in both the Republican and the Democrat Party.
We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
The owners of this country are the voters of this country.
You're wrong about that, my friend.
Aren't the owners of this country the voters in this country who elected George Bush?
No, they're not. Listen, politics, these elections are a charade. It is a charade.
Oh, okay.
It is, they are meant to... I'll tell you, listen, just listen for a minute. Learn a little something. The elections and politicians are in place in order to give Americans the illusion that they have freedom of choice. You don't really have choice in this country.
This is not a party issue. This is not a left-right issue. The question is not, should we have big government or little government? The question is, who should government serve? And it should serve the people. And it hasn't been doing it, and it still isn't doing it. And changing from Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican is not going to change that.
So that's the problem. As long as we depend on the phony wrestlers and depend upon their well-paid cheerleaders in the media to keep us focused on secondary issues, we're never going to get out of this mess.